Welcome, everybody. I am Mike Kelley in drag. I'm actually very excited to be able to introduce Eric because I've gotten to know him in the last couple of weeks. We've done a lot of Zoom practices and I've learned a lot. I had no idea that there were some things that were available to me and to you guys that Eric's going to show us tonight. But Eric is from Manlius, New York, which is over, I think, is it between Syracuse and Rochester, would it be? Eric, you can unmute yourself and talk with me if you like.
There we go. Actually, Marcellus. It's between Syracuse and
Marcellus, not
yes.
Manlius. Okay, I'm going to add you as a spotlight. So wherever Marcellus is, he just recently was invited to join the Casanova Watercolor Society. So we have an idea of somewhere about where Marcellus is. And I really like the quote that he gave us to print, and I sent out to everybody. I'm going to read it. My only goal in watercolor is to capture the light of the scene and convey the unpredictable and spontaneous nature of the medium. And actually, I think that's everybody's goal. Mm-hmm. It's primary for me, I know, and I can't wait to see how Eric does it. First thing he's going to do is introduce himself, and then I'm going to turn it over to him. And he's going to share his screen, which I had no idea could be done, which is really cool. So I'm going to make him the only spotlight. I'm going to remove mine. And there we have it. Okay, Eric, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be here, a little nervous because it's always challenging to demonstrate in front of other artists. It's really very solitary type of endeavor. But I spent a lot of time, I thought you would be interested in the way I go about working. And I've, over the years, developed my own sort of method. In my classes, I don't expect anyone to follow that, but I hope that they might get some ideas from it. And this is how I set up tonight's demo. I've got a little PowerPoint that I'm going to use only to make it clear how I approach my work. And then I will go ahead and do a demo. I've got a reference here in my studio on another computer. I really prefer working outside, but I do a lot of work from reference indoors. It helps a lot, especially when you're trying to work on some technique. You don't have to deal with all the other problems that you have out in nature, you know, this changing sun, the wind, all the problems that you have. And so I do work quite a bit from slides when I'm trying to work on my technique. So we'll go through the PowerPoint. I thought you might be interested in the beginning to see the materials I use. You probably are very experienced, but you might see some things that you might be interested in. And if you are, you can text through Carol and I'll answer any questions as we go along. So I'm going to switch over to my PowerPoint and let me just take care of that. And everyone should be able to see my PowerPoint.
Now, let me interject here, and Eric, and do what you taught me. Between you should have a vertical column of people along the side, and between those people and the PowerPoint screen, there's a little double line that if you work on that, you can enlarge the PowerPoint or reduce it so you see Eric all the time, or the rest of us. For those of you who are working on an iPad, I'm not really sure whether that's available to you. I think it probably is. If you're on a phone, I think you're probably out of luck. But anyway, I hope you can see a good big piece of the shared
Is there anyone that can't see it? I can enlarge this. It's a little, makes a little problem if I want to go back to slides, but if
I think it's fine. I think it's fine.
Okay, that's good. Okay,
We've had
So-
one comment that your audio is a little bit fuzzy.
okay, oops. Let's see if I can change my mic here.
Thanks, Ingrid, for that. I can hear him, but it is a little fuzzy also for me.
Is that any better?
Um, Keep talking.
Is okay. Just let me know if you can't hear. I have a mic on my shirt that usually works better than the mic from my computer, but if it isn't, I could switch back and maybe that will work better. But for my materials, I have, it's called the Little Brass Box. I'm going to have to go through this and then I'll switch to the other video and you can actually see them and you can ask me any questions. But it's a small brass paint box, really deep wells. Until we get to that, I can just hold it up. And I have, when I switch over to my other camera, I can show you how I have my colors arranged, but I like to go from warm to cool right around the spectrum. I also like to have a warm, a neutral, and a cool of each of the different colors. And then I have some neutrals at the bottom that I use, like burnt umber, raw umber, burnt sienna. And I use those quite a bit as well. As far as my brushes, I use the quills for most of my work, but as I go through the painting, the quills are very soft. They hold a lot of water and pigment. But as I go through the painting, I find that I need a little stiffer brush, and I switch to my rounds. And I happen to like the Escoda Versatile brush, and I'll show you those as we get. I switch over to the other camera. I like to stretch my paper. I use 140 pound. I have the Ken Bromley Perfect Stretchers, and I'll show you quickly how that's done. It's very simple, but then I never have any buckling problems at all. There's a couple of drawbacks to it. Is when you stretch it, you lose about 1/4 of an inch around the outside of your paper. But to me, I much prefer not having to worry about the buckling of the paper.
You stretch it, do you wet it first before you stretch
I
it?
do wet it. Yep, I wet it. I lay it on the board. I let it expand, and then I drive in the rubber grommets. They aren't really a grommet, they're rods that go around the edges. And then I've started, I think everyone knows or has experienced how their watercolors, after they've dried, they become a little dull. And I've started varnishing my watercolors. And there's a number of ways in the research that I've done, I've found that you can use clear acrylic varnish, but I use this crystal water varnish from Natural Pigments. And it's Natural Pigments is a company out in California that makes painting or pigments the way they were traditionally done in the 1800s. And this is supposed to be a varnish that duplicates what was used back then as well. And let's see. I'll give, when I switch over to the other camera, I'll show you that. I could even do a quick demo to show you the difference, how it brightens your watercolor as you use it. You do have to be careful because you don't want to erase your watercolor, but I've been pretty successful with it. So before I started painting, I always try to keep these things in mind. I always want to try to decide what it is that I want to paint and focus on that. And the rest can be done very loosely. I try to lay my pigments down rather than scrub them in or work them over and over with my brush. And then I always try to just very lightly mix my paints, or sometimes, if I can, simply mix them on the paper. And I have examples of both of that when I do my demo. And then I also, of course, is try to keep my focus on the value of what it is I'm painting rather than the color. And of course, most important, especially outdoors, is to simplify. So what I do is I call it painting from the middle. And you've probably all seen, you can follow my cursor down here. This is a grayscale that I've had for years that I made. I try to, when I'm looking at a scene, decide how I can break this scene, this design down into two main areas. And I start from the middle and decide what can be grouped in the darks, and then what can be grouped in the lights. And I break it up with my initial wash into lights and darks. Now that's not very traditional. Most watercolorists will start from the light with a wash, go over that and keep building their washes and eventually get to their darks. In this demo, you'll see how I handle that. Okay, so here I have, I know this is a, this particular sketch is a preliminary study of Andrew Wyeth, but it's perfect for demonstrating what I'm talking about, whereas he has a dark value and everything else is white. He's broken it up into two groups, lights and darks. And then as you continue with the painting, you can see that he's gone into the lights and has variation, and his darks have variation. But in the beginning, I think of it as lights or darks. So here I have a photo that I've taken. It lends itself very well for you to understand exactly how I might approach this. So we have a scene here. If I were looking at this out in the field, I would try to decide, what do I want to group with my darks? Well, it'll be everything that my cursor's on. And what would I want to group with my lights? And I would leave the highlights of the rocks and this path. And I would try to, in my initial washes, break it down into those two groups. Now, this is my initial drawing, and this would be my first wash. So I have put down the first wash in the middle value. I've altered the color slightly as I got into the rocks, but the value is the same. Once that's dried or dry enough, I'll continue on and build up these darks and then go back in the lights and either leave it as it is as white paper or build that up slightly as well with very light washes. And this would be a next stage that I would then work with. Also, if you notice this very first, it had a walk back here and everything. I always am willing to just add something on the spur of the moment and just add it in because I think it works better in the motif, even though it's not what I'm actually seeing. So I'm always, if something, especially when an accident happens and I like it, I will tend to go with that accident, even though I've got a set plan in my head of what I want to do. So this is what I'm going to try to work on with you today. It's very complicated, but what I'm interested in and loved about this when I was out in the field is the brightness of the light and the light and shade and the shadows, all those different spots of sunlight coming through. So it's an image that will be perfect to try to demonstrate what I like in a watercolor. So I'm going to switch over now to my other camera, and I'll start. That's what I'm working from. And from now on, you'll just be seeing my painting as it progresses. So let me find my, I'm going to stop this share. And I'm going to switch over to now. This is my desk. So I did this sketch because this afternoon because it seemed a bit of a waste of time. The painting's going to take up most of the time that I have with you. So I did the sketch ahead of time. But
Eric, there you go.
We are.
I wasn't seeing the bottom of the paper, but now I can.
Okay. So up there.
That's good.
So here's my palette. Everyone can hear me?
Yep.
Good, because I've got my mic now. I'm away from my computer. But here's my palette going from a cool yellow to cadmium to what I love is gamboge. And then there's brown pink, which is kind of a yellow green, goes through the reds, the violets, the blues, into the greens, and then my neutrals down here. And my last little pin is for opaque white or white gouache, in case I want to put a highlight in later. And with my water, if you can see that, I like to do two things. I have a well and a jar inside it so that when I'm painting, let me know if for some reason you can't see what I'm doing.
No, everything is down pretty low.
Okay.
And I think we've run into this with other people with this kind of camera before. The more you move your hand up and down, the less focus it's in, right?
Okay. All right.
So right now it's out of focus because it needs time to get into focus.
Yeah.
Here. Okay.
Okay. Can you see everything now?
Yeah,
yep.
Pretty much. Yep.
Okay. So I use this part of the well to rinse my brush, and then this to get the fresh water so that it's always clean and you aren't dipping into that dirty water, especially as the painting progresses. This gets very dark, but this will tend to stay nice and clean for your fresh washes. Okay. So my strategy, I have to bring up my image again here. So you're going to see my head here for a second. Okay. I just I think there's a timer on that, and it will go out after a few minutes, but I'll take care of that as we go. Okay, so in the beginning, I like to have a clear plan of what I'm doing. And if you remember the image, we've got a sand, this is from Cape Cod up near Provincetown in the National Seashore. And it was in the pitch pine forest. And in the distance, there's this huge dune. And then you're looking through this pine forest, a lot of light coming through it, making all this dappled sunlight. So that's what I'm going to try to capture. Using the method that I've sort of become attached to, I'm going to decide, well, what will I leave white? I'm going to group into the lights. So it will, for this particular one, I'm going to try to leave for that first wash, the sky. This where there's the break and you can see the sand dune or the sand. There's a little patch of sand over in the distance here too that I think is important. I'm going to try to leave that. And then we've got this foreground that comes out from under the shadow that's I'm going to attempt to leave white as well. So that's my strategy. As I get into with this first wash, I'm going to start using more and less of certain colors as the image is sort of suggesting it to me is the best way of saying it. Also, whenever I can, I'm going to, you'll see as I start painting, I mix as little as possible. I don't like to take a color and then another color and get it all mixed up and then use it. I like to take out a bit of color, take out another color, and then just basically mix it or bring them together and then start my wash. So that in your wash, you're going to have more of a sense of the colors that made that up. Okay, so I'm going to try to have sort of a neutral green in here because it's in the distance. And then I've got to be careful with these tree trunks that I've got to get lighter or darker or leave light spots where that sun is coming through. So I'm going to, as I do this, it's very difficult for me not to just start focusing on my painting, but as I'm painting, I'm going to try very hard to verbalize what I'm thinking as I go along, and you have a better idea of what I'm trying to do. So I'm going to try to get this neutral green in this background, and then I'm going to sort of transition to a yellowish red using the sienna and gamboge, and then get more sienna and stronger as we get down into this under the trees where all these needles have fallen. So here we go. So one thing I'm going to do first is just on my palette up here, I'm going to try to come up with a mixture that I think represents what's going on in the background back there. And that green right there is kind of what I'm looking for. It's a yellowish green and it's not mixed very well, but I think that adds a lot of interest to the painting. So that's what I'm going to go for in this initial starting wash. And I'm going to just lay it down as I go. I want to be careful. I'm not worried about the tree so much, but I do want to be careful that spot that I mentioned to you before. And I'm going to add a little bit more green in there. Try to get, remember I said I wasn't going to worry too much about these branches this first time through. In the beginning, it always seems like total chaos. And sometimes I kind of lose track of where things are, but here's that white that I want to try to leave. I'm going to transition a little bit to my sienna for this trunk. Now, I wanted to keep this light. I always have tissues with me, so I'm going to stop some of that up because I forgot about that when I got to it. And try to get back to that color that I had. And this is, oops, a little bit greener than I want. A little bit green. There we go. Okay. I'm going to try to transition into more sienna and gamboge for that reddish look. I forgot this tree here. I want to get that in. Maybe leave a little spot there where there's that light coming through. I'll just leave that the white of the paper. The problem for me, as it is with everyone, is your colors always look so dark when you're when they're wet, and then as they dry, you discover that they'll get lighter and lighter. I'm going to try to go to just more of a yellow here. And that would be my first wash of my middle values. So I've left what I've sort of grouped it two areas, my lights, my light masses, and my darker masses. Now we're going to start building up on this. In this light area, I'm going to, for whatever, just the slightest sense of a little bit of very transparent coolness here.
What color are you using to make that?
I'm using a cobalt and a little cerulean. And it's basically going to be a echo of what's happening in the sky. So I'm going to now go back to the sky. I'm ignoring all these other details for now. I'm just going to worry about them after I've blocked in that sky. And one thing that I like to do with the sky is, in something like this, is just maybe wet it somewhat first. And then drop in. I've got my tissues right here, and then just let it spread. So I've got some variation up there, and same with this. One thing I really like about watercolors, personal, this is a personal taste of mine, is I like to see watercolors that are kind of spontaneous and not really controlled. Now, what I'm working for in my own work is to be able to not do everything quickly and fast and haphazard, but I would love to make it look as though it was done in minutes.
Mhm.
And it has took a lot of work. And that's what I'm striving for, because I really love to see fluid washes and just very direct brush strokes, not brush strokes that are, just put down and let it go. But it takes a lot of discipline. And I often get caught up in, trying to fix things. So here I have what I would call my underpainting. And that's the beginning of that design that I've set up. So I'm just going to give this a little touch to see if it's dry enough to start, and I'll start in same colors. But now, I don't know if we talked about it. I might have skipped over I have this saying that I like to go from tea, which I put down, to coffee, to cream, as I paint. And by that, I mean, in the beginning, my washes are very thin and light. It's kind of like the consistency of tea. And as I progress through the painting, I add more and more pigment so that the consistency becomes thicker. And as you get towards the end, I'll just do it right out of the pan and very thick. And that's what I would call your cream. By doing it that way, I don't have to worry too much of whether this is wet still, because if you're putting pigment that has less water than what's on the paper, it won't create those cauliflowers. It won't spread out into it. If you put pigment, you may know this already, but if you put some pigment that has more water than what's on here, you're going to get a cauliflower and it's going to spread throughout the paper. Okay. So I guess the next thing that I'm going to do is try to go to these tree trunks. And I'm going to try to, again, it's getting a little thicker. And I'm going to maybe introduce some coolness. I don't know whether I'll use my cobalt or my Prussian blue. I absolutely love Prussian, but it is a dangerous color because you can go downhill with that very quickly. But I absolutely love the way if it's done correctly, the way it works. Okay, so I've got those out and I'm going to try to go in and darken those, and I'm going to have to kind of keep track of where those light areas, and you can see, I think you can see how the paint isn't totally mixed there. And I love that effect. And I tried to add some, what I think is calling for is a little bit of coolness in there right now. Being a little careful on these branches. Laying down the color.
That's one of your quill brushes, or?
Yeah, this is one of the quills. Yep. As the paints become thicker, I'm going to switch to my Escoda rounds, and the bristles are a little bit stiffer. I'm going to try to block in now all that foliage at the top. And to do that, I'm going to just lay in some yellow, and on top of that, just touch in some green. And I don't want it to mix, because that should, if things go well, suggest that light coming through where you've got the brightness of the sunshine and I got to be careful. I'm getting a little bit more water in there than I really want. So maybe I'll switch to my quill. Or not my quill, but my round. And I can control that a little bit better.
So that's a really small one, right?
Yeah, it is. I've got a very small area here. I could get a bigger one, but I'm trying to, oops, again, I have put too much water and it's run. I'm trying to have that yellow show through so that we have that sense of light coming through. And I gotta sort of, I'm gonna just scrape it over the top of my paper. I use a rough paper always, just so that I can do this. But that by rubbing this over, it tends to give that look of needles. And this we will come back to, but I want to block it in for now, just so I really just laying that paint on and just leaving it there. And that you see, I'm conflicted now with my trying to focus and share with you what I'm doing. because I'm sure you all have experienced how difficult it is to focus or not focus and not do exactly what you're hoping to do. Get this real thick and then just sort of scrape over the top of that. We're going to come back to this. What I'm doing right now is just sort of laying in those middle tones again. Let's see what we got up here. Touching it down. Get some of those neutrals, darks. I'm fighting the temptation to be fussy right now because it's way too soon to get too fussy with this. All right, so I'm going to go back to these tree trunks. One thing I've discovered that I have a tendency, I think like everyone, is to go off the rails with your color. And you start seeing different colors and you keep adding them and you put in reds and then you see a pink and you put this in and that in. I try to be disciplined in sticking with the colors that I had in mind for my entire painting. So here we go. I want to come down through here. I'm going to try to do a little bit thicker, if you can see that, and not very well mixed. Sort of mixing that on the paper. And there's sort of shadows coming through there. I don't know. I hope you can see that. I'm really just sort of laying that paint down on the surface and letting it do what it will do. I'm putting it out here on my palette, but I'm not. It's a little difficult because I want the right proportions and I don't want to mix it. So it's kind of a contradictory thing I'm trying to do here.
You have a question,
Yes.
actually a request from Catherine. She wonders if at some point you can discuss how you use the Bromer stretchers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. At the end, I have, I thought I would actually show you how they work. So don't let me forget that, Carol, okay?
Okay. Have you always stretched your watercolor paper on something like stretchers?
I always have, and I'll tell you, I have, I think I've tried every stretcher that's made. I've used Homosote and stapled it down. I've taped it. I've gotten these plastic stretchers where you pound in and none of them worked. At least I wasn't happy with them. But this system, I think, is terrific. If you can see, it's got this rubber rod. It's got a groove routed out all the way around. It's basically a piece of 1/4-inch plywood. And then with a rubber mallet, when the papers, I just hold it over and I tap it in. And when it dries, it will never buckle on you. It's just hard as a rock. It's great. I love it. But, you know, it has some drawbacks. You lose some paper here. I have to iron the edges down so it's back to a flat surface. It's not a big problem. Okay. Try to give the sense of that, all that variation in color coming through. Yeah, let's see, this is where I wanted to be a little bit careful. Being a little bit careful in through here, only because I've got all that transition. And I want to be careful with this light and dark in here. When I'm doing something like this, I think you, as you probably know, each of you, I try to be very careful about suggesting the contour that, oops, I didn't mean to do that, but I'll just kind of sop it up a little bit with a brush. Also,
like to try and have lost and found edges where something in the back joins value-wise with something in the front. I'm going to add a little bit of coolness to that, darkness, sense of light coming up through there. Same down through here. And I'm going to go a little bit heavy, oops, on that. Actually using a much smaller brush than I need to. I got carried away and I forgot that I had it, but it's okay. Too much water. So it's always this sort of this fight of getting exactly what, I guess that's the challenge of it, is trying to make your paints do exactly what it is you have in mind for them.
When they don't, that's when the fun begins.
What?
And when they don't do what you want, that's when the fun begins.
Absolutely. You know, that's one thing that I absolutely believe in. If something goes awry, before you try to fix it, maybe it's better than what you had planned.
Yep.
And just leave it. I'm trying to add some cools and some warms as well as I go down through here. Now, one thing with trees, you probably may or may not already know, and with shadows, you want to make sure that they don't abruptly stop with the surface that it's setting on. That goes for a glass of flowers, a vase, a tree. It should carry into that surface it's setting on. And I'm going to carry that in with this. We'll come back to this and work with it later. And these shadow shapes, I want to be elliptical because they are on a flat surface. And that's how it really will read. I'm just pulling out these shadow shapes. And maybe just a touch of warmth in there with this alizarin crimson. And I'm sort of dragging this across. All right, I'll come back to this later. But that made that connection with the trunk. Now let's go back up to this trunk here. Carol, let me know if I'm going over, okay? I don't want to, but.
It's 8 o'clock. You have plenty of time.
Okay. So again, we have this shadow shape that bends around that branch, and I want to try to suggest that if I can.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Are you still referring to or looking at the original photo when you're painting?
I am. Yeah, I am. It's right in front of me, and I'm using that as my. We'll compare the two.
Yeah.
I think you'll, at the end, I'm not trying at all to do a photographic representation of it. but I am taking my cues from it.
You could say it's your inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. But on this, I'm just going to sort of just set my brush down and let it go. And I just lost my,
Now we're looking at your head.
yeah, my computer just timed out. I have to key it in again. I usually see it fading, but I didn't catch it that time. Okay, so I can live with this. I can go back with my darker shades here. If you observe most trees that are in the shade up near the branches is where it tends to be the very darkest, and then it becomes lighter as it goes down through. This is my second wash. Let me just try to lay that down and not really mix it too much. And try to carry out those shadow shapes up here as well. And I'll come back to this. Okay. My brush. All right. I'm going to go to my smaller brushes and start getting thicker with my paint. And I'm also, I'm now going to go back into this background and start, I did the middle tones and I left the whites, but I'm going to now build on that just slightly with sort of a neutral green, just to, I think I'll do it with a bigger brush. Okay. Have to be careful I don't get that too dark because it is in the distance there, and I want it to be that neutral green that I started out with. It's hard to keep in mind those sort of goals that you set for yourself when you started out. Okay, so I think we're okay with that. Now I'm going to come down. To make this stand out, I noticed that there's a very dark shadowed sort of hedgerow of small scruffy pines. So I'm going to go to a heavier, to my my Escoda round. The brushes are a little bit firmer, and I'm going to try to lay in some yellows and then get one other thing that I do like to try to do, and I'm not always successful, is rather than try to draw a bush, I'd rather just try to lay down some pigment And hopefully it will read exactly what it is I'm representing, even though it's not rendered. I'm going to try to just bring in some lighter yellow with this, maybe a little touch of green.
What green do you use from the tube there?
I like to use, the only green, I have two greens that I like to use, Carol. I use Viridian because it can make some beautiful spring greens. And I like to use sap green. Very often you can, obviously it's very easy to make your greens too, but sometimes I'd rather just touch something to touch it up, the sap green with a little bit of yellow or something, rather than start mixing my own. And this is that. Just kind of lay that in there. And then go back in with my darks and hopefully it'll spread somewhat. I'm going to try to fan out my brush a little bit so I can get that kind of flared look of the pines. Okay. Now I'm going to go into these shadow shapes. I have a lot of trouble with, I'm going to clean up my palette for a second. Got a little messy here. Now these shadows, that's a problem that I have. Most instructors that I had years ago, not that long ago, but not recently, always said maybe a value darker than what is casting. I don't know if that works well for me or not, but the other thing is trying to pick the right color to make that shadow. But I'm going to go with my, I found that for me, this Prussian blue seems to work well. And I'm going to just lay that in. Looks like it's got a little bit of yellow in it. I'm going to add a little bit of warmth to it. Some places thicker than others. Because I'm sure you all notice that there's always shadows that seem to have more light or dark in them. This sort of comes around like this. I have a tendency, I always want to go overkill with shadows, and then all of a sudden I've got nothing but a big blob of, rather than the light that I want to see coming through. I'm going to go back to that burnt umber, or that burnt sienna, and suggest that color that the ground is. Now, I see a lot more shadow shapes than is there, but for now, I'm going to leave it and maybe decide later whether it needs more shadow shapes or not. And we'll come over to this other side. And connect to these. Really, I'm just sort of drawing those shapes out. Get a little thicker with my paint and just where those bush hit the base of the ground, it's kind of dark there. There's a very dark shadow comes in through here. And then it sort of just will set off that tree if I do it nice and dark. Maybe add a little warmth to it with my alizarin. Now there's a bush down in here and I'm debating as we talk whether I want to bother with it or just pretend it's not there. But I'm going to try to suggest that it's there. I'm using my liner because I can get a finer edge with it.
Is that an Escoda too, or is that a different make?
Yeah, that is an Escoda, yes. I have two of them. I can never remember the sizes wear off real quickly.
Yeah.
But fortunately, Dick Black keeps a record of what you bought.
Really?
So I don't have to remember. I can just go back in and reorder what I had. I don't know if that's going to work or not. I'm just trying to be real rough with it. I don't want it to look too finished. Okay, that'll bring some light over there. Now I'll go back into and maybe set it off with a shadow shape. Want that a little bit darker. This is almost pure sienna. I think the shadows look a little bit more realistic if it's not all this exactly the same color. Okay, that might be a little bit busy with these shadow shapes, but now I want to go back in and really start looking at my really dark darks with a smaller brush. Start thinking about things that are characteristic of this particular tree. Doesn't have to be a lot of things, but we've got some very odd shaped branches coming out. It's just really just line work. And I'm using this liner to kind of suggest the outer edges of these pine trees. I had a watercolorist that I studied with, and he said, you know, you can get away with just about anything in the body, paint it however you want, but when you get to the edges, you want to be a little careful. Now that dark there you see is beginning to set off the light from that coming through. I want to do that in each case. And I'm now really getting into my very darks. When I first was doing watercolors, I would get a painting to a point that I thought was the end, and I'd be very disappointed because it just was so flat. And it took me a long time to realize that I just wasn't going far enough. I had the lights and the middle tones, but I never really got into the really darks. I mean, this is almost pure pigment now. And I'm trying to be a little careful how it goes on. But it's only through your darks that you're going to have a sense of light. That Prussian blue is a killer. So I'm going to try to just, I like using a liner sometimes because I don't have any control over it. I just sort of just let it. I don't know if Carol had mentioned that I do abstracts in acrylic and oils. And I found that doing both, it really helps. One helps the other. I do a lot of line work in my abstracts, and I have to be very aware of the design on my canvas, and that sort of carries over in this as well. I want to just sort of scruff this down through this, get a sense of that rough bark. And I got to be careful here. I'm going to just roll over it and get a sense of that dappled light. Let's see. This becomes a little light down in here. Oop, well, that was a mistake, but I'm going to not worry about it. Okay, go back to my larger round and continue. And I just need some definition down here. We've got a big shadow shape here, and it sort of wraps around here. I hope it's coming through, that it's beginning to kind of make sense of all that light coming through the trees. Gotta go back over here. I'm almost to where we'll. My round, small round, there's some branches over here that are very characteristic of these. Oops, a little too blue. I'll just go over it and tone it down. Kind of just sort of like a helter-skelter branch here. Very dark in the background there. Makes, I don't know, it's kind of just magic. I think all of a sudden it starts to. Okay, my back in that mixture of yellows and greens, and now I'm going to go in with my darks and my umbers and see if I can't just almost thick paint. I don't know if you can see that. Push that up. Just rubbing my brush so it's pretty dry and flicking it.
What do you like better, oil or watercolor? It's a trick question.
Yeah, it's I think I like because I can make corrections with the oil, and I do it a lot. I can't make them as successfully with the watercolor, but I'm not nearly as spontaneous with oils as I would like to be. Okay. Now I'm looking at the monitor here and what you're seeing, and I'm kind of disappointed how much weaker it looks there than it does here on the paper. But I can't do anything about that.
But when you're all done, when we're done here and you've done
Yep.
touching up you want to do, you're going to send me an image and I'll make sure that everybody gets it.
Okay.
It'll also be included as part of the YouTube video. So people, but I don't think I think you've saved the light beautifully, which is one of the things I have the most trouble with.
It's really been a challenge. I think I'm really about as much as I dare do right now. What I would do if this were, I was by myself outside or whatever, I would probably have a cup of coffee or sit and just look at it for a bit and not do anything until I decided exactly what was needed. I would like to do some dark edges to set off that light of the tree. Okay, not much else I will do with this. I could now, this is the point where you can get fussy. There's a lot of little things I could do. I'm tempted, I could do a little really light wash in here and down here, but I kind of like that contrast of the light and dark. So I'm just going to leave it as is.
Okay.
I think I'll leave enough time for people to ask me questions. If you have any, you want me to leave it on the image or do you want me to switch back?
Now that's good. Leave it on the image. Does anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a question about, you use Arches paper primarily?
I don't. I use Fabriano Artistica.
Okay.
It's I don't know. There's two things about it. I don't think it's as nice a paper as Arches, but Arches is not very forgiving for me. And if I've made a mess of this, that shows the color a little bit better.
Yeah.
I can scrub this down with a brush in the tub and flip it over and re-stretch it, and then I've got a second piece of paper. But I do like Fabriano. The surface, the rough surface, it's man-made, but the surface doesn't appear as natural as the Arches. There are dimples on it that almost look like they were pressed into it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about what I was doing or any of the materials or?
We're a quiet group tonight.
All right,
You did bring up on your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Sally Trainer has a question, I think.
There's a place in the upper left quadrant that is quite bright in between the branches, and I can't see it very well, so I don't know if it's just because, nope, down, over, right, toward the right, no, toward the left.
Other right.
Yeah, go left or right.
over
Not you.
here.
No.
Oh.
There's a dark branch that goes across, and you've got a rough triangle, not that one, go down now. And go to your right.
My right.
Okay, down underneath that dark branch, that area there. I can't see what's in it, and it seems very bright. I guess I'm.
You know, you're right. Actually, I have overlooked that. It really does need something. That hedge line goes right through there, and I didn't notice it, and I left it out. But that's something, you know, when you're sort of look at it and start deciding what needs. I totally agree with you. It's just sort of a void there that I would fix.
I always think in terms of planes, what is where in space, and right. I guess what really caught my eye there, but I couldn't see it clearly.
Right. I do like to your question about planes, I do like to try to connect foreground with background wherever I can with the same value, and sort of just play. I don't know if that comes from my abstract or not, but I don't like everything clearly delineated. I like to see it having sort of a dialogue between foreground, background, and middle ground.
I kind of like how you've left those bright lights on the trunks themselves. It seems when you were doing it, it seemed very bold, and it didn't make a lot of visual sense to me, but it does now.
Yeah, that's something that I have a lot of. Well, I think I said that in the beginning of trying to get that right value, because when there's very little around it, often it just doesn't look right. But if you follow through on it, your hunch, whatever it is, often it works out. I don't know if you all experience this, but I have to be very careful with my work for maybe 3 or 4 days after I finished it, because my immediate reaction is that this is awful. Mm-hmm. So I will put it away. I don't look at it. And then I bring it back out, and I realize, you know, you just needed to step back a bit and see it differently.
Boy, I can take that home, Eric. And I think Sally Trainer would be really happy for me to take that home.
It's a problem. To expound on that a little bit more, I hate to admit this, but there's a lot of work that I did, and I really didn't like it. I always take a photograph of everything I finish and keep it cataloged by year on my computer.
Lynn Davis.
Throw things away and
sorry.
Then gone back to the image and think, oh my God, why did I throw that away? That was foolish.
Yes. Hello. Thank you for a beautiful demo. I'm curious. You have quite a large array of large brushes, and I was just waiting for you to go grab one of those, and you stayed with that little liner. Do you just have a different, bad day, good day, small brush, big brush, or you
Yeah,
work?
I don't know how, do you have a sense of how big this,
Not really.
this is a quarter sheet.
Yeah.
And, you're right, you could, I could go in with, I love this one. It's really a quill, but
Yeah.
these are great, this brand of quills. But yes, I could go in. I think I'm not as brave as I should be.
Maybe in oil or acrylic or.
Yeah, I have no
Okay.
problem with that. I can just go in and, actually that's how I start my abstracts. I just lay down whatever is happening. And then I go back and keep refining both the color and my shapes. I like working with negative and positive shapes.
Oh,
and-
sure. Yeah.
And lines. So.
Very nice. Well, thank you.
Let's take no, Michelle, did you want to ask a question?
I would love to see the photograph.
Oh,
if
sure.
possible. Thank you, Eric.
Yep, I'm gonna have to.
I sent it to everybody in an email yesterday.
Oh,
So you can, if you look through your emails.
Oh. I'm
gonna-
sorry. I didn't realize it was in the email.
I can
Yeah, it's the one
switch
that
it
gives
back.
all the date changes and stuff.
And I think my share screen has it right here.
Yeah,
There it is.
yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Now that, I think I said in the beginning, I certainly think that you can tell what the reference was, but I don't feel obligated to try to do a photo realistic
What?
of anything I do.
What?
You're gonna mute Sally. Can you show us the rest of your paintings that are in your
Sure,
PowerPoint?
sure. Okay, so I'm just now starting to do gouache, and what I do with that is, this is a full sheet, and if it drips, I leave the drips. And on these, I put it on a wall in my studio. I staple it up and I paint perfectly vertical. And so sometimes this will happen and I leave it. This is a little one right in there too. But gouache is relatively new to me. It's very similar to oil, but
Water-based.
yeah, water-based. And let's see, show you some of my abstracts. This is one that it came from, I did a residency in Vermont in February, and the rivers were just breaking up with ice. And what I really like about this is there is no, I did a lot of preliminary drawings. I did a lot of watercolors, but when I painted this, I had no reference whatsoever. I just did it from my memory. And I really liked the way it came out. I just had to show them that I hate to say it, but it went up on the wall and it was sold immediately. So
Oh, great.
Really
Love that.
pleased. So this is more of what I traditionally do. I'd like to go to that idea of painting from memory, but I found it very difficult unless I've done a lot of preliminary studies. But with this, I'm very interested in these negative spaces and what makes a connection and what doesn't. Why does it become an open space? And this on this, is this in the foreground or the background? All those sort of, basically they're technical questions that you get in realist painting, but they're done without the realism. Also, what makes a line is a line
just two masses together and a space between them, or is it a line, is it scratched into paint? Or is it a line that's actually drawn? I think they're all lines, but different ways of constructing them. And this focuses, actually the title is Blue Line. It's that idea of negative and positive shapes and foreground and background. And then, you know, because this is encircled by a blue line, is this a shape? Or is it just a line on top of a larger shape?
You sound more like an engineer than an advertising artist. Oh, nice.
Same problems with this. I was sort of wondering about, this one's acrylic. And I'm switching to acrylic because in my studio, the ventilation is fine, but it's not great for petroleum products. And I personally don't think that they're good for anybody. I don't care what the ventilation is. And so I switched to acrylics. It's taken me a while to sort of change gears. What I do love about them is how quickly they dry. And what I absolutely hate about them is how quickly they dry.
Yeah.
So, but I do love being able to layer colors and getting new colors from that. And then I think I've got one more here. Again, that idea of negative, positive shapes and lines that set off shapes.
Very nice.
So I don't know. That's about all I've got for you.
Well, it's great.
Anyone have any questions?
I'd love to talk about composition of the abstract.
Yeah, that's it. I take, except, you know, I have to stop during the pandemic. It's been almost 4 years now, but I go down every summer to Woodstock and spend 3 or 4 weeks throughout the summer. And there's an abstract artist that I love that I work with down there. And then there's a couple of print makers that do abstract work, and I'm learning a lot from them. Relatively new to it, but it's very interesting. I find it fascinating. I don't know that the first class was Jenny. She knew right away that I knew how to draw from my abstracts, and I'm totally perplexed how that is. But
Yeah.
you know, I find that fascinating. There's so much that goes into your work that is totally beyond your control. It's just part of who you are.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
Well, I think if we don't have any more questions, I want to make sure that you understand, Eric, what a great job you did, how much we appreciated it. Do you want to get rid of your share screen and let us see your face again?
Yes, there we go.
There you go. Now I can
You
put
see,
it.
my hair is all like, I've been like this the whole time I paint. It's just like,
You can tell that the light is down in our various homes.
yeah.
But I wish Mike Killalay was here so we could thank him for finding you.
Well, thank you.
That crystal varnish. That
Oh,
you
yeah, let me get that for you.
Okay, I'll put you on Spotlight again. You are on Spotlight.
Actually, I have a little black and white sketch that I set aside if anyone was going to be interested in it. And I could varnish it right now, and you'll see the difference that it makes if you're interested.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Okay. So this is the product. And it's made, let's see, where are you?
There. Yep.
Crystal water varnish.
Rublev.
Rublev. but their company is, oh, I've already forgotten what it is. Natural pigments out of California. And I think it works really well. I think it really brightens them up. I'm going to have to just find some sort of, I'm going to switch back to the other video. And for this, you know, I like to use a good sized brush, and I need a, see, I'll pour a little bit of it in here.
How did you find it?
Well, for a while, I was interested in learning how to use egg tempera. And when I was searching for a company that sold the pigments for egg tempera, where you actually crack the egg, use the egg yolk and mix it with powdered. Well, I taught myself how to do that. And this was the only company I could find that made powdered pigments. And that's how I found them. And then I discovered that they have a lot of other types of thing. And I discovered this watercolor varnish. So I'll put a little bit in there. Now, you know, it just occurred to me, I've never done it on black and white, but I don't see why it wouldn't be the same thing. Can you see this? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yep. So this is watercolor, so we have to be careful. And I try to get a good amount of it and let it run down the paper. But I'm surprised how I haven't ever really ruined the paintings, but
There's always a first time.
yeah. I don't know if you can see.
Nice soft brush.
Yeah, and I'm just glazing over the top of it.
Do you put more than one coat on, or?
No, you can. It says you can. It also suggests using it with your watercolor to make them more transparent as you're painting.
Oh,
I have not tried that. I don't really know how to introduce it into the pigment, whether you would pour a little on or whether you would, but I don't know if you can see that, but it really kind of brightens it up. If it were, let me try showing you on. I'm going to put it on these blue and yellow, and
you can't really see that it's on there at all. It doesn't change the color.
no, it doesn't change it at all. It just makes it as bright, much brighter than it after it's dried.
Okay, here's a question. The next question is, would you say that after you've done that, that your watercolor would be okay without glass, or would you still put
Well, I
glass?
tell you, that's a good question because I'm going to experiment with that. That's why I bought this stuff. It's acrylic, but I have not used it, so I can't vouch for it. But I've read this would be permanent. This is not. This is not permanent. It's water soluble and it would have to go under glass. But this is permanent, and once you've painted it on your watercolor, it would be, you know, it can't be changed. And I'm going to experiment with it, and then maybe not. I love seeing watercolors framed without glass, just
glued, adhered to a support with just a frame around it, a larger support. And I'm going to try to do that, but I haven't yet, Carol.
Well, we're modifying our prospectus for this water media show. Deb's the brains behind the modification, but to include things that ultimately would not have to be under glass, and they would be either waxed or sprayed or that.
I know in my reading, they says you could spray it. I have never, no matter what I do with spray, been able to spray an even coat. I would not trust myself not to spot it. So
I spray it on my collages and it seems fine, but they're very uneven anyway, so.
you know, are they water soluble or other
Parts of them are, yeah.
They are, yeah.
According to Golden, you have to start with their archival spray gloss. And the first coat will be shiny, and then you use either their satin or matte spray to dull it down. But the gloss dries quicker and is less apt to reactivate watercolor.
So they're recommending that you can varnish a watercolor with their acrylics.
Right.
Oh, yes.
And
In fact,
people are doing it.
we're having a breaking glass show here in our area at River Art in August. So we'll see how that goes.
Well, are you saying that breaking glass in that they aren't using glass on their watercolors?
Yes.
No glass, no plexi.
That's interesting. I would love that, you know, because isn't that the biggest expense of framing?
Yes, it
I
is.
mean, acrylic is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And glass, if you're sending your work anywhere, they won't accept it. It has to be acrylic or plexi.
You mean plexi, yeah.
Yeah, to go through the mail.
Well, that's another thing we should consider, Deb, this crystal water varnish from Natural Pigments.
Although they would still, for the safety of the piece, want to use an acrylic varnish over it or a cold wax, because the crystal is still water soluble.
You're
Right.
right. You're absolutely right.
Heaven
Or put-
forbid somebody sneeze
Yeah.
on the artwork and, a heavy sneeze and reactivate.
Yeah, I
something
would never use this and not put a glass over it, because it's no different than watercolor, really. It's kind of like a dumb Arabic almost. But I just haven't had a chance to use it yet. I've got Goldens as well, and I use golden acrylics for my acrylics, and I bought some of the varnish. I'll see how that works. That would be nice.
Who is the manufacturer of your watercolor pigments?
I use Holbein, except for my burnt sienna. I don't think anybody in the world makes a better burnt sienna than Winsor Newton. I absolutely love it.
I agree.
You put a little yellow with it and you've got beautiful oranges and it's a nice neutral. I mean, it's transparent. It's the best. But other than that, I use everything as Holbein.
And you have one of those brass palettes that I absolutely want. And
Well, get in line, because it took 18 months for me to get this.
well, it's not the line that keeps me from buying it.
Oh, I know what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep. The people that have come to Niagara Frontier area with brass palettes are people like Thomas Schaller and Ian Stewart and
Well, Ian's the one that I first saw it. I was juried into a New England Watercolor Society show that he was the juror, and he was also giving demos and weeks
workshop. So when I got there, I was able to sit in and I saw this palette and he explained it and I thought, oh my God, I gotta get one.
You know what I loved about what he said, though? He said, I can't guarantee that you're going to be able to paint as well as I do by just having this palette. What?
No, he's right about that. It has nothing to do with your ability. It's just hard work.
Yeah. Well, right now we're looking at your surface, but I think we can.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right. No, it's great. It's nice to watch.
Okay.
Any more questions, fellas? Ladies? I think we're set.
That was, thank
Okay.
you so much.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
very much.
you.
I've
Yep,
enjoyed,
Thank you.
enjoyed working with you before too, Eric. It was great.
All right, thanks, Carol. You've been a big help and I appreciate it.
All right,
Did you take
everybody.
care of all the chat questions? I see there's 3 down there.
No, we've done them all. The last one
Okay.
was, are you referring to the original photo when you're painting? Somebody, Catherine asked about how you use Bromer stretchers.
Okay.
And that's a new thing. I don't think we've seen anybody stretch their watercolor paper in this area.
I do all mine. I tell you, I just hate those bubbles and crinkles and warped paper where the watercolor pulls into the, the depression. I don't know, you can do all sorts of things when it's nice and straight.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Guys, have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank everybody.
Take
Bye.
care.